Hello, beautiful soul, and welcome back to The Voice Within. Okay, so today podcast episode I'm recording in the bedroom while my son is seated in the living room watching TV. And if you hear some cartoons in the background, just bear with me. We are in Sarajevo in the smaller apartment, and I don't have much space to separate myself to be completely in a silence while I'm recording this. But regardless of everything, here I am this Sunday with a new wisdom. So today we're going to talk about meaning, or when we assign meaning to the things which are happening in our life. I often say like stories we create in our mind. A lot of people who are not self-aware, who are not doing this work, they are basically not even aware of these stories. But most of the women that are listening to me and listening this podcast, we are already a bit deeper in the self-development. We are a bit deeper in the self-work. So we often can recognize the stories that we create in our mind about the things which are happening in our life. Or maybe you already recognize them sometimes, but you didn't know that those stories mean something, that's the meaning your mind creates. And in today's podcast episode, we're going to talk a little bit about it. And this episode will bring you some clarity and understanding on what is happening inside of your mind and how you can basically adjust your behavior based on this understanding. So I had a story of my life which was running for a very long time. I had one big question of life, and that question was, is this what I'm seeing, perceiving in the moment is truth, or it's my trauma speaking? Let me explain you a little bit better. All of my life I was a lot of time gaslighted. I was made to doubt my perception and the way I perceive the things. So growing in that way often left me doubting myself and the way I am perceiving the world around me. Then adding to that the way I grew up in a war and a lot of things which were happening while I was growing up, I was always put in some position where I was questioning the way I see reality. So when something would happen in my life and I would react based on that situation or the feeling around that situation, I was often told that I'm overreacting, that I'm making drama unnecessary, that I am too sensitive. And based on that, I was always questioning my reactions on the things which are happening around me or the way I perceive the things. So that question of, is this truth or is this my trauma speaking, was the question which was haunting me, let's say, a long time in my adulthood. Because the things would happen and then I would react and then the people would tell me it's not like that, you are too sensitive. Then I was questioning actually, is this what I saw in the moment? Let's say the people treating me in a certain way or disrespecting me or having some arguments with the people and me reacting based on that feeling, is this real? Or am I reacting based on my previous traumas in my life? I could never tell the difference. And I took very long time to understand myself and to understand what is actually happening. One of the places where I got really huge relief was during my therapy process with my therapist at that time, that she was explaining me, even if it's your trauma speaking, it's still your truth. Even if something is triggering you in the moment based on your trauma, based on the previous experience you had, that feeling is still valid. So what does that mean? We often think that if somebody had some trauma in life, then their reaction in the moment, it's not real reason to react that way because they had trauma. But this is not really, how to say it, it's not true, but it's kind of destabilizing for the person who had trauma. Let's make it extreme. Let's make some situation where somebody was, let's say, physically attacked by somebody. That person who is physically attacked has trauma in their body. So if they are facing situation which looks similar to that physical attack that they had in the past and they react based on that, their feelings in the moment are valid, regardless that feeling are coming from trauma. If we say that the person is reacting just based on their trauma, we are basically gaslighting their experience, which was abusive, for example. Or I find it that often in personal development, they say it's just your trigger. Yeah, it is trigger, but that trigger is data. If we are triggered by somebody's behavior in the moment, that trigger is telling us that we are maybe tolerating something which is disrespectful, that somebody is crossing our boundaries. That place needs to be evaluated instead of gaslighted. Because if we say it's just your trigger, it seems like it doesn't matter. It's not real. It's just your your trigger. It's your own responsibility. Yes, it's our own responsibility to evaluate that trigger, but that trigger, or where does that feeling coming from in the first place, it's real for us. So I had that deep question of, is this trauma or is this truth? Is this trigger or is this truth? Am I allowed to act in the moment based on how I feel, or I should assess basically what is happening? And I would often get confused when I would see patterns of behavior in other people towards me, and then I would say to myself, okay, maybe this is just trigger. Maybe this is something which is coming from my past, but then the people would repeat behavior again, and I would feel like I betrayed myself. And then on another side, if I would react based on their behavior, then the people would tell me that I am overreacting. So there was that hinge in my life where I just didn't know how to react properly. When is appropriate to protect myself, to set boundaries? When is appropriate just to stay quiet? When is appropriate to evaluate the things which are happening inside of me? So today we're going to talk about it. Today we're going to talk about that meaning that our brain creates. So I was doing great deal of researching and reading about how our brain is functioning, how our brain is creating the stories, and how those stories are basically driving our behavior. So I have discovered that there is what we feel in the moment is happening, and that there is the parts where our brain creates story about the things which are happening around us. So let's take one simple example. Let's say you having some conversation with somebody, with a friend or family member, doesn't really matter. And you feel in the moment that the way they said something or the way they articulated certain things feels slightly disrespectful to you. You immediately feel it inside of your body. You feel that tension. Maybe you feel your heart beating a bit faster. Your palms are sweating. You feel that they crossed some boundaries. So if in that moment you react based on that feeling, the people often would feel attacked, and maybe they will paint you like a villain and say that you are overreacting or oversensitive. They would defend their intention instead of actually addressing the behavior that created your reaction. And then on another side, if you stay quiet, you feel that sting of self-betrayal inside of yourself. You feel like somebody crossed your boundaries and you didn't protect yourself. So what is actually happening? The situation happens. Somebody in conversation cross your boundary. You feel physical sensation inside of yourself, and because our brain doesn't like uncertainty, doesn't like gaps, doesn't like not knowing, our brain creates the story. Our brain basically fills the blank with stories that coming from our past or from pattern reading from our history. So basically that's the meaning making. Our brain creates the meaning on that situation based on what happened to us somewhere in the past, which looks similar to the situation we are in the present, and we often react based on that meaning. And why does our brain does this? Because like I said, our brain doesn't like uncertainty, not knowing, doesn't like gaps. And when our brain creates the meaning, that meaning itself reduces anxiety, because now we have our why. Why is this happening? So let's say if some friend is crossing your boundary in the conversation with you, your brain may create the story about she doesn't like me, she's jealous or whatsoever. Now you have your meaning, and now you're acting based on that meaning. Your anxiety is reduced, and basically you know what you're supposed to do because now you have your story which is created in your mind. But the problem is that sometimes the meaning that our brain creates sometimes is correct, sometimes is not. And often, even if we say to another person, in this case, let's say your friend, if you tell her that felt disrespectful to me, or I didn't like the way you put it, those sentences, the people often fight intention. They say, I didn't intend it to disrespect you. But the thing is, intention doesn't delete impact. Even if somebody didn't intend to disrespect you, impact on you can still be disrespectful. And if another person is not self-aware enough to say, hey, that was not my intention, however, I apologize if that felt disrespectful to you, we will feel in that relationship with another person like we are erased, like our boundaries don't matter. Why do people often justify intention? and not look into impact, because people often say, if my intentions are clean, that means I'm a good person. If I didn't meant to harm you, then I didn't do nothing bad. But we can meant not to harm somebody and still harm somebody. How other people perceive the things in their inner world. Somebody can have trauma, somebody can have rough day. And if we don't be mindful about how our words are impacting another person, we will always move from the place of my intentions are good. But the thing is, intentions, they live inside of another person. We cannot see them. We don't know what somebody is intending to do, but the impact on us can feel real. We can feel disrespected in conversation even if another person didn't mean to disrespect us. So when the people don't take responsibility for intention and impact, when everything stays like in a fog and floating, our brain creates the story, the meaning, so we can lower our anxiety around uncertainty. But like I said, sometimes that meaning is correct and sometimes it's not. The danger which is happening over here is sometimes we act on the meaning without questioning it, or sometimes we don't do nothing because we basically gaslight ourselves. From my observation of myself for many, many years and observing women around me, women online, I saw that we usually, like a woman, we swing between two absolute. The first absolute in meaning making is everyone is against me, everybody is jealous, my life is hard, I am the victim. And the second one is maybe it's not so bad, maybe I'm sensitive, maybe they didn't meant to do that. The first one is basically projection. We are projecting on another person their intentions. We are projecting what we think that the people meant to do to us. And the second one is basically self-betrayal, is self-erasing ourselves to preserve connection with another person. And honestly, both of them are quite dangerous. Why they are dangerous? Because if we go into absolute of everyone is against me and I'm a victim in my own life, then we are always expecting danger from other people. We never can surrender and trust to the people. And if we are constantly gaslighting ourselves, then we often overlook when the people are actually disrespectful to us, when they are really crossing our boundaries, and we fail to protect ourselves and our inner world. So I was asking myself this question for a long time. How would I know? How would I know actually when the people are really against me and I need to protect myself? Where is the places where I can lower my guard? And where is the places where I actually have to protect myself? Because if I observe the world and the people in my life in absolute, that everybody is against me, then I will be always and constantly bracing myself against other people, protecting myself even in the places where it's not necessary. On another side, if I don't protect myself when the people are really crossing my boundaries, then I am erasing myself, and I feel it deeply when I lower my dignity. So from my experience, the difference and the way to know what to do is basically in the pattern. So if one event happens, that can be emotion, that can be just a moment, but repeated events is information. So let's explain this. Let's take again our example of you having some miscommunication with your friend. If your friend in the moment said something that felt disrespectful in that certain particular situation, but generally your friend is very, very respectful to you and always respects your boundaries, then we can assign the meaning is just one event. We can even say it politely that that information or that sentence didn't land nicely to us, or maybe we will even stay quiet because we know that that person usually is not in that way, and maybe they had a rough day, maybe they have something on their own mind, maybe the situation in the moment came a little bit harder to us because of our own things in life. However, if we have repeated pattern of that same person constantly, disrespecting us or throwing some sarcasm at us or like pushing some agenda under the belt or constantly trying to minimize us, then we have repeated pattern, and this is now information. Danger is, like I said, if one event we explain to ourselves like everybody is against me, or if repeated events we gaslight ourselves and say, yeah, it's just my friend, I'm just too sensitive. In the first one, we will react strongly on just temporary emotion of the person who is generally okay with us, or if the person is generally not okay with us and disrespecting us repeatedly, we will gaslight ourselves and not protect ourselves because we tend to say we are too sensitive. We gaslight ourselves and our perception to preserve the bond with another person. Like I said, our brain doesn't like uncertainty, doesn't like gaps or not knowing. But being mature, being self-led woman is tolerating that gap to evaluate. So how do I do this in my life? I give myself a little bit of space and time to separate what I feel in the moment from what is really happening. So basically, I'm reading the pattern. Is this one time in event? Is this person usually disrespecting me? Do I have some informations that this kind of behavior this person showed towards me before? How did I assess the same similar behavior before? So basically, I question the situation. I give myself time to pause enough to say, okay, is this one-time event or is this something which happened before? If it happened before and before I didn't set boundaries, now when I see it and when we see something we cannot unsee it, then it's time for me to draw the line. But if it is one-time situation, then based on relationship with that person, I can choose sometimes to stay quiet because it preserves relationship and me staying quiet will not affect me that much, or I can address it when that moment passes in some different way. But maturity is basically staying in that gap of uncertainty and questioning the meaning that our brain creates. When we do this, we give ourselves space and time to basically act in maturity, to choose our response instead of being reactive. We women are trained to doubt ourselves, to doubt our perception, to soften, to explain, to accept, to normalize. And because of this, we often question our reaction. We often question our perception and the way we perceive the world. But sometimes what we call I am just too sensitive or they didn't mean it, sometimes what we call our own trigger, it's basically pattern. It's something which keeps repeating in our life. And we often gaslight ourselves because we don't want to take responsibility to face the truth. If somebody is crossing our boundaries repeatedly and we explain it to ourselves with I'm too sensitive or maybe this is just my trigger, we are basically avoiding to take responsibility to be self-led woman and step up for ourselves, set the boundaries and stop behavior in the first place. Because as long as we create good enough story to explain somebody else's behavior, we don't have to act or do anything to stop that behavior. So reading the meaning and being self-led woman and stopping enough to evaluate what that certain situation means, it puts us in that position of maturity. Because once we see the pattern, once we evaluate, once we see is this what this person is doing first time or this is repeating, then we basically have to act on it. And that is often uncomfortable. So a lot of women, they don't even want to assess the situation. They don't even want to think about it deeply because once they see the truth, our dignity is forcing us to do something about it. Now we cannot say, oh, I am too sensitive when it's basically repeated pattern of disrespect. Now we have to act on it. And acting on it often involves setting the boundaries. And like we said before, people often don't like the boundaries and we often feel rejected or misunderstood by other people when we are practicing autonomy and when we are setting boundaries with the people. But self-betrayal or the stories we create to ourselves in our mind just to justify people's behavior, they don't disappear. They accumulate inside of us and they turn into resentment. And when we have resentment, then our reactions, they become explosive towards other people. And often after repeated crossing of the boundaries, it takes just one small misstep that we basically rage at people because we've been accumulating their behavior. This is why it's dangerous. This is why I often say set the boundaries while you still can control yourself. Set the boundaries while you are still calm and you can choose your response instead of being reactive. Because for women, what does it often happen when we become reactive in the moment? Now the people kind of attack us for our reaction, completely overlooking where is that reaction coming from. Now it becomes you reacting like that, you are emotional, you are a woman, but what brought to that reaction, repeated behavior by another person, is completely overlooked. And we are put often in position where we are defending our reactions and our rights to react in the moment, and basically we forget what did it brought it to that place in the first place. So this is why it's so important that we assess the meaning and that we choose our responses while we still can choose them, while we are still in control of our emotions. So for the end of this podcast episode, next time when you are in some situation with another person where something happens and you feel that sting inside of yourself that something is not fair, something is not correct, stop for a second and evaluate. Is this single moment or is this repeated pattern? How does this person usually behaves? How does it behave in this moment? Is there some logical explanation for their behavior in the moment, or this is something which they do all the time? And often what does it helps is actually asking another person directly, did you mean to disrespect me in this moment? Was that your intention? That single question often dissolves a lot of misunderstanding and meaning making in our head when we actually ask the people about their intention. So in next situation, ask yourself, evaluate, is this single event or repeated pattern? Am I filling the gap, or I'm finally seeing something that I ignored for a long time? And often what we ignored for a long time sometimes is not comfortable to see. Because once we see it, we have responsibility to act on it. And sometimes when we see it, a little bit stings and a little bit hurts when we see basically what we have tolerated for very, very long time. And we can change not to tolerate it anymore and set the boundaries and step up for ourselves. Be self-led woman who protects her peace, calm, and inner world. And that's all for today. I hope you enjoyed and you found some valuable wisdom in today's podcast episode. Until the next Sunday, I wish you a lovely and beautiful rest of the day. Bye.